Hello and welcome to the Ocean Impact Podcast Pitchfest 2020 series. I'm Nick Chiarelli, thanks for joining me. Late last year, OIO ran the Ocean Impact Pitchfest 2020. We were inundated with almost 200 applications from 38 countries and were blown away by the incredible breadth and quality of ideas and ventures that applied, all trying to make a positive impact on planet Ocean. Over the course of this Pitchfest 2020 series, we'll dive into the challenge and opportunity areas that each of the finalists are working on, find out about their unique solution, and discuss the key challenges and learnings they've encountered on their journey so far. We'll also discuss their why, their motivation for working towards a healthy ocean, what the road ahead looks like for them, and how you, the listener, might be able to support their journey. This week I'm talking to Andrew Rella, who is a coastal and environmental engineer and the Global Director of Engineering of Israeli-based startup ECOncrete Tech Limited. ECOncrete has developed concrete technology that combines high structural performance with ecological benefits. The industrialisation and development of coastlines around the world has led to a drastic reduction in important shoreline habitat. By developing artificial habitat using bioenhancing concrete, ECOncrete can both restore habitat and protect coastlines from the increasing impacts of climate change. ECOncrete offers a suite of high-performance, environmentally sensitive concrete solutions that enhance the biological and ecological value of urban, coastal, and marine infrastructure, while increasing their strength and durability. And, in addition to the ecological and biological advantages, ECOncrete's technology also creates an active carbon sink through the growth of calcifying organisms that thrive on the structures once they're in the water. This podcast episode is dedicated to Dr. Shimrit Perkel-Finkel, the co-founder and CEO of ECOncrete, who tragically passed away earlier this month. Dr. Perkel-Finkel was a widely celebrated marine biologist and ecologist who specialised in the sustainable management of urban marine habitats. Passionate about reducing the ecological footprint of coastal and marine infrastructure, she spent the past 20 years eco-engineering innovative concrete products to transform coastlines. She also defied the norm of being a leader within a male-dominated industry. Dr. Perkel-Finkel was a co-founder and CEO, a wife and a mum, and she will be sorely missed by many. I hope you enjoy this discussion with Andrew Rella on the Ocean Impact Podcast, Pitchfest 2020 series. Can't take the ocean out of me. Hi Andrew, and welcome to the Ocean Impact Podcast. Firstly, let me extend our deepest condolences from myself and everyone associated with Ocean Impact Organisation and the ocean community more broadly in Australia. Shimrit was a true ocean impact pioneer in every sense, and she'll be sorely missed. I'd also like to thank you for joining me today. I wasn't sure if you wanted to proceed with the discussion, but you said that continuing to work towards Shimrit's vision is what she would have wanted. So thank you very much for taking the time in what's no doubt a challenging period for you.
No, thank you for that, Nick. Appreciate it. It's been a rough week, but as you said, we're all very determined to forth our mission to its full potential. So thank you for that, and as well for this opportunity.
No problem at all. Well, let's talk about ECOncrete. Let's talk about that mission, what it is, what you guys are here to do. Let's start from the start. Tell us a little bit about grey designs. What are we talking about when we refer to grey designs in urban and coastal infrastructure?
Yeah, well, when the reference grey is sort of for us the opposite of green or blue, which is referring to ecologically sensitive or nature inclusive design. So with grey infrastructure, traditional concrete infrastructure, as has been the case for thousands of years, It's both chemically and design wise adverse to the growth of different marine species actually on the surface of that infrastructure itself. And actually, really it's been the norm in the past for whatever growth does occur on the concrete is typically scraped away or cleaned away with power washers or the like. But the main issues with traditional infrastructure is first the composition is very adverse to marine life. Not only is concrete very alkaline, its pH is between about 12.5 or 13. Most marine species prefer close to neutral, 7, so very far off as far as that's concerned. But even beyond that, a lot of just negative chemicals are actually put into the concrete mix design for one reason or another. All have their purpose from a structural or design standpoint, engineering standpoint. But as far as marine life is concerned, many of these chemical agents will actually leach out of the concrete element for years, if not decades. And that's why more often than not, we see very low levels of marine growth actually on the surface of the concrete. And if there is growth, it's typically either very low levels of growth or actually invasive species overpopulating the area. And then from a design standpoint, concrete to date has been designed very smooth and many times vertical surfaces. So really there's no shelter or refuge for the different marine species to occupy the space. So they just find it a very harsh environment to grow and develop on. And then ultimately, they just are not very successful in that.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, this the concept of coastal infrastructure and grey designs. It's one way I think about it is that it's a problem that is completely visible everywhere, but because we're so used to seeing urban infrastructure and harbour infrastructure, we don't understand what it actually should look like if we hadn't come in and built cities and ports and so forth. Where I'm in Sydney. We talk about Sydney Harbour being, quite often people talk about it as being one of the most beautiful harbours in the world. And the reality of it is, when you take a ferry trip around the harbour, I don't know what percentage it is, but it'd be interesting to find out what percentage of Sydney Harbour is actually now man-made structure. And that's either mostly, concrete blocks, as you described, a mixture of concrete and sandstone, really, and almost all of it vertical and flat, and very little in terms of life attaching to that infrastructure. And previously, this is the part that people don't think about. What did that look like before man came along? And it would have been mangroves and all sorts of other ecosystems with life thriving. And so essentially that's what ECOncrete's all about, right? Bringing some of that life back to man-made marinas, ports, waterfronts, and so forth.
Absolutely, and as you said, we can never restore the environment back to its natural condition because we're so far beyond that. New York City, for example, Manhattan is another great example. It used to be all marshlands, very mild sloping shorelines with marsh plantings everywhere, and now it's ultimately just been made into vertical bulkheads around its entire perimeter. And even the thought of growth being on these different types of marine structures, people, as you said, have to wrap their head around that these were once natural environments, because it's come so far from that.
And so what ECOncrete does, if I understand correctly, is you're not suggesting that we put more concrete infrastructure in place. What you're saying is, hey, we have a better concrete solution here that can enhance the infrastructure with probably or possibly better structural properties, but also enhance the biology and ecology of an area by attracting life.
Absolutely, we recognize that concrete is the go-to material in coastal marine construction, with over 70% of the world's coastal marine infrastructure being concrete-based. And that's really been the case ever since the Romans created hydraulic concrete. They put volcanic ash in the concrete, allowed to get stronger over time, cure underwater. And many of those structures are actually still functioning from a structural standpoint. So we wanted to address, the problem within the material that's actually being used, because we recognize that, that will be the material for the foreseeable future, if not, forever, based off of the fact that concrete, from a structural standpoint, is an amazing material. It's readily available. It's cost effective. There's very, very good reasons why it's used so prolifically. But we also recognize that, with the ecological enhancement that we're introducing into the concrete, that we need to make sure that we ensure its structural sincerity and purpose. And, that's always our primary objective, is to maintain the structural purpose of the structure, not interfere with it whatsoever from that standpoint. But then within that framework, also provide for ecological uplift throughout these infrastructure schemes.
Andrew, I'm going to throw you, put you on the spot here, and ask you about the Romans. Do you know? Do you by any chance know how they came across the idea to put volcanic ash in the concrete mix?
Yeah, but and again, I'm not an expert to this, but I would assume that it was probably, they saw the very fine powder material, and thought it would be an adequate substitute for the cement. So, and probably only afterwards did they actually realize its full extent. But that's really only my best guess towards that.
It sounds good. Sounds good to me. So tell me, so let's talk about some competitors out there. How do you see what's the landscape look like for marine infrastructure with biological benefits? Are you guys the only ones out there, or is there other competitors, slightly different technologies, different products?
Yep, I'd say there's a lot of groups out there working towards artificial reef and different types of enhancements that's solely focused on the environment. But really, we're in a league of our own as far as providing a fully structural solution for active marine infrastructure. So we're not really doing reef restoration. We're doing more so active seawalls and breakwaters and scour protection for offshore infrastructure. And when we get involved in a project, we need to ensure that there's some sort of structural purpose to the project, whether it be flood protection, shoreline stabilization, or the like.
And from what I understand, Andrew, your pitch to customers, it's not just about the fact that your concrete products can enhance the ecology of a marine area. You also compete on price. And in fact, from what I understand, you might be slightly over the upfront capex, but over the extended lifetime of an infrastructure area, you can quite often be significantly cheaper.
Yep, absolutely. And I guess before I address that, I should finish your last question a bit more fully. That, as you said, with what you just asked, how do we compare to traditional concrete? And more so than anything, I would say that is our biggest competitor, is traditional concrete. That is what the vast majority of if not nearly all the projects that are going into the water, billions and billions of dollars are being earmarked annually for coastal marine construction. And, nearly 99% of the time they're using traditional concrete and concrete technologies. So that's really what we're trying to displace, is the the level of comfort and ease with implementing what's been done for many years before with our new technology. And the value in that, leading to your next question, is, yeah, we may be marginally more expensive. For a large scale project, you're probably looking at, a difference 4 to 7% on concrete material costs. But if you look at the return on investment, overall, we're providing expedited permitting. We're providing on-site mitigation, which can be very significant and many times a roadblock to many projects being built. And we're reducing the actual maintenance requirements for the project, because you have these marine organisms, calcium carbonate-based organisms, oysters, mussels, barnacles, basically a natural form of cement, and they encase the structure, and so the structure is actually getting stronger over time. We're seeing less chipping, cracking, spalling on the surface of the structure. The organisms actually absorb chlorides, so then you're having less chloride penetration. So chlorides ultimately break down the rebar over time and rust it, and then the whole structural capacity of the concrete elements, unfortunately, it is compromised. And then the organisms themselves, again, the fact that they're calcium carbonate based, are actually increasing the compressive strength of the concrete. It's quite amazing. The density of an oyster and these different calcium carbonate based organisms are actually denser than the concrete itself. And if you can get them to grow on high enough density around these structural elements, then it can actually increase the compressive strength of the concrete itself.
Wow, that's fascinating. I had no idea about that until just now. So let me get this right. You're telling me that your products attract oysters and other life, these calcium carbonate organisms, and they can increase the strength, the structural integrity of that underwater concrete product.
Absolutely, yeah. There's studies from Louisiana State University in the United States that show the presence of oysters alone over a 2-year period can increase the flexural strength tenfold.
Tenfold,
So
wow.
just absolutely incredible. That's where we see the benefit of working with nature, and the benefits of it, not only just from an environmental standpoint and provision of ecosystem services, but structurally as well.
So, and if I'm not wrong as well, so let's stick with oysters. So oysters are sticking to your harbour infrastructure. It could be, what would it look like?
Seawalls, pilot casements.
Yeah. So just oysters will stick on. They will increase up to possibly 10 times the structural strength of that infrastructure. They're also filtering water and improving water quality, but they're also, so when they start to aggregate, they're also sequestering or can sequester a significant amount of carbon.
Correct. Yeah, if you had about, we've done some rough calculations, and for about 1 kilometer of seawall that's ecologically enhanced, say on average is about 7 meters tall, that absorbs about 2 tons of carbon annually, and so that's the equivalent of about 100 trees. So it's not an immense amount of carbon sequestration, but any bit will help. And considering the thousands and thousands of miles of coastal and marine infrastructure around the world, if that was all utilized in that way, it would be quite significant.
Absolutely, yeah, that's phenomenal.
And it's also important to note that the carbon doesn't get released later on. So many types of carbon sequestration, ultimately could be reintroduced back into the atmosphere and the environment. But the fact that it's actually being used to form the shells of the oysters, the mussels, the barnacles, then it actually remains captured over time, long term, which is very important.
So it stays in that shell regardless of what happens to it.
Yeah, even if it's ground into very fine powder over millennia, then ultimately, though, that carbon is still captured and won't be introduced into the atmosphere.
So essentially, as it remains as some sort of solid, it remains. It doesn't get released.
Exactly.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Okay. That's there. You go. I didn't. We spent a little bit of time talking pre-recording, and we didn't talk through that. So I've just found out some of that brand new now. That's fascinating. Do you see many customers interested, or do you see people increasingly interested in being able to articulate the carbon sequestration potential? Like, do you see customers in the future um, going with ECOncrete because they want to be able to say that this project has sequestered, X tons of carbon over a period?
Absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, over in the UK, where I'm based, that's one of the main objectives of the environmental framework over here at the moment. And you know, elsewhere around the world, there's many different places looking to become either carbon neutral by certain dates, or reduce their carbon emissions significantly over the upcoming decades. So for us, and again, depending upon which market we're working in, that's always one of the primary objectives.
Mm.
Especially
But
since concrete is so basically the production of cement, the clinker. They call it. You have to basically put it through very intensive and high carbon emission processes to get the cement to a usable form. So concrete actually comprises about 8% of the world's CO2 emissions, and it's
wow,
actually concrete is the second most used material by volume after water.
it's pervasive, isn't it? And if we can make it better, then why wouldn't we? Let's talk about your technology for a moment. From what I understand, there's sort of three elements to your products. The first is the actual concrete admixture, and the second being the surface textures, and the third being your designs, the actual designs of the product themselves. Um, Talk us through those, and in particular, tell us a little bit about the admixture.
Yep. So the admixture ultimately is very fine powder material, and it's mostly byproducts from the quarry industry. So it's 92% carbon neutral, and we apply it to the concrete mix or mix design to the equivalent of 10% of the cement. And in many cases, we can actually, initially we were doing it as an additive, but now that we've seen that the material itself, the admixture, improved structural performance, we've seen an increase of 10% of compressive strength. We've seen reduction of weight loss when it comes to freeze and thaw cycles, and a number of other different structural targets that are very important for coastal marine construction, like chloride penetration. And now that we've undergone very thorough laboratory testing and have our certificates, now we can actually apply it as a replacement of the cement content, so we can reduce the carbon footprint that way. So ultimately, what we'll do is we'll replace 10% of the cement with our admixture. And what the admixture is actually doing, even though it's termed a biological or an ecological admixture or bioenhancing admixture, really it's working through structural means. It's actually creating a denser concrete. It creates a crystalline structure throughout the concrete element, and that actually eliminates. We were discussing earlier how different chemical agents and whatnot can actually leach out of the concrete element for many years. So actually, the admixture seals the concrete, and so regardless of what's in the mix design itself, that is no longer then interacting with the surface of the concrete element, nor the surrounding environment, and we can create a biofilm within a matter of weeks compared to several years. And we're getting many cases 85 to 100% surface coverage of the concrete elements within a 2-year period, where traditional infrastructure can take decades, if not, if it happens at all. But and again, we're not seeing these thriving ecosystems on infrastructure. We're seeing certain species that are thriving, but really, what we're trying to promote is a higher abundance and higher biodiversity of species. But I guess before I get too far off track with that, then combined with the other design elements on a micro to macro scale. Really, what we're trying to do is incorporate the principles of ecological engineering, and it's increasing the surface area, having more surface rugosity and complexity compared to a smooth, flat surface. We want to try to mimic nature and provide as much shelter and refuge and complexity into the design as possible to promote the various species. And we're not the only ones working from a design standpoint towards that. You have the Seattle waterfront, you have the Bangaroo Harbor, you have different initiatives really all throughout the world that have recognized if you increase the complexity and the surface roughness on the design or the surface of coastal and marine infrastructure, it will improve the levels of growth. And then on a macro scale, on a larger scale, we want to have retaining elements. We want to really have as much wetted surfaces as possible. And again, we're mimicking nature. So say with our tide pools, our precast tide pools, we're mimicking natural tide pools and really trying to improve the overall design for, typically we'll identify target species, native species that we want to promote in the region. And we want to have as many different species as possible to provide and ultimately serve this local food chain and ecosystem. So we identify these different target species, and then we ultimately can alter the design of the units itself to cater to those individual and specific species.
Yeah, you mentioned ecological and nature-based designs, Andrew. It just takes me back to a moment many years ago when I first came across the idea of biomimicry. And I remember, I can't recall the book, but at the time I was blown away when there was a chapter in this book that talked about man-made structures and how we started building at some point everything in straight lines. And the chapter was all about water flow and how all of our pipes are straight, but essentially the quickest way for water to move from one point to another is not in a straight line at all, and it's in a conical, like a cylinder type flow. And I think that's always stuck with me. And nature-based design is such a fascinating area because the main thing that I take out of it is just how there's no concept of waste in nature. There's virtually zero waste. And, it's fascinating. I mean, we could sit here all day and talk about some of the best designs being based on natural occurring things. And a lot of people probably don't even notice it every day that there's designs every day that we're embracing. And thankfully, we're seeing more and more based around solutions that people have found in nature. We don't need to recreate the wheel every time we want a better design. The answers are staring at us a lot of the time. We just need to go out and actually look for them in nature.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've talked about the technology. We'll talk about some of your pilot projects and current scalable projects that are going on shortly. But just off the back of the tech, we talked about that. Let's talk a little bit about some of the products. Let's give the listeners a little bit of a little bit more context for what some of the products with your concrete tech look like and what they're used for.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the technology can be applied to any concrete that's intended for the marine environment, and we actually have one virtual solution too, which I can introduce later, which is targeting mosses and lichens and different terrestrial plants. But really, anywhere you have an infrastructure, whether it be vertical such as seawalls, or whether it be breakwaters, and I guess I suppose I can introduce each of the different sort of off-the-shelf products that we have. Obviously one would be our seawalls, and the seawalls either can be precast panels, they can be cast on site, where you actually are pouring the concrete at the actual construction site into the mold, at where the structure will actually sit. Or then you can deliver alternatively, which is the precast option, is you make them ultimately off-site and you ship them fully constructed, and then you install them in a vertical manner on site. But without getting into too much detail, that's one solution. And really what we'll do is apply our admixture, and we'll use mold liners or mold systems to create the unique surface textures. We even have different agents that you can actually spray on the mold system that will give the surface of the concrete a unique surface texture. So depending upon the application itself, and we always have to keep in mind the construction processes within the project. We're often not the ones designing the project. We're the ones we're being brought in by the engineers and the landscape architects and fitting into existing projects. So that the application many times how it will be constructed and the overall structural design is outside our scope of work. But otherwise, we have breakwater structures and rock armored revetments and ripraps, and as I'm sure everybody has seen, some sort of shoreline that is protected by rock armoring. And ultimately, what we do is have several products, armoring units, which are subtidal, so they would go below the influence of the tidal variation, so below mean low water, or our tide pools, which go between mean high water, mean low water within the tidal zone. And ultimately, these units are gravity-based units, very heavy units, anywhere from 3.5 to 1.5 tons in weight, and their sheer mass is what keeps them stable and protects the shoreline and stabilizes the shoreline. But ultimately, we replace the rock armoring, or even many times there's traditional precast concrete units that are specified, especially in Australia and throughout the Mediterranean and Europe, where there's very high levels of exposure to wave conditions and winter storms. Many times it's not rock that is locally available that's of a big enough size. So that's where the need for these precast concrete units comes from. So we're either replacing rock armoring with our precast units, or we're replacing or as an alternative using our precast unit versus other concrete precast units that are made from traditional concrete. We can also integrate our technologies into those units. So there's a lot of, there's many different designs out on the market being offered by many different companies, and we can simply apply the admixture into the mixing process and provide them with the mold liners for their existing mold systems. So there's really no limitation as far as that's concerned, and that's really so for breakwaters and sloping shorelines. Then otherwise we have pile encasements, so piers are supported by piles, and in many places the piles themselves are wooden. Especially, this is a case study from over in the United States and in New York City. Ever since the Clean Water Act happened in the 1970s, the water quality has improved. And traditionally, going back into the early 1900s, they just used wooden piles. And there was actually no problem with the wooden piles when the water was basically a dead zone because of the pollution. But now that the water quality has improved and we've seen an uptake in the number of species, now marine boars are actually more prevalent in attacking the wooden piles. So there were a number of structures that actually, had collapsed and been completely compromised due to that. And so it's been recognized now that you have to actually take those timber piles, and many times those timber piles can go hundreds of feet and meters into the soil beyond the actual, so say the Hudson River, where a pier is could be 45 feet deep, but then the soil goes up to 200 feet deep. Until it hits bedrock. So these wooden piles are basically driven to bedrock, and then wherever that wooden pile is exposed to water, you have to cover it in concrete to protect it from marine boars. So you basically have this concrete encapsulation from the surface of the pier all the way down into the mud. And then ultimately that protects the concrete. So there's structures in New York City and elsewhere in the world. There's one structure that has hundreds and hundreds of piles. I think 800 piles is Pier 40 in New York City, and it's basically a dead zone because none of those piles actually are supplying any ecological benefit. But if you could imagine, if we have the structure that underneath it has 800 piles, which all have ecologically enhanced pile encasements, then you could have quite a significant ecological impact on the environment, a positive impact rather than a negative one, if they were designed and constructed in the right manner. So that's what we're working towards as far as piling casements. Otherwise, we have marine mattresses. So marine mattresses. So it's a bit hard to visualize, but the paver blocks out on the street. Imagine that if you were to take several hundred of those and string them together on rope, almost like necklaces, and we basically make a large mattress out of these blocks rather. And again, we're applying the admixture. We're applying a very unique surface texture and retaining features. And these marine mattresses, they're used very heavily throughout the marine industry for scour protection and shoreline stabilization. In the offshore market, they're actually used to protect from cables and the wind turbines themselves. So they're used in very, very high quantities. And really that's what we've done is we've identified different products on the market that are used traditionally, and we've created ecologically enhanced versions of them. Ultimately working towards being a replacement for these traditional units. And then I guess lastly, I'll just say that we have the one terrestrial product, which I briefly mentioned, and that's same technologies, but addressing the composition and the surface texture and the design, but for mosses and lichens and land-based plants. And this can be used for outside or inside garden spaces, on the sides of buildings, and we've actually been very successful with that.
That's probably a good segue there, Andrew. You mentioned New York. What was it, 800 marine pylons in New York, or was that just a section of...
That was just one single pier. That was just Pier 40, the biggest pier in New York.
One single pier, 800 pylons. I mean, imagine we've cleaned up the water to a decent extent. Imagine the life that could be... how thriving that life could be with 800 piers full of life. No one would think of New York as a dive destination, right? But
right.
wouldn't it be cool if people were, all right, let's go check out one of these. What was it, Pier 41?
Pier 40, yeah, absolutely.
Pier 40. And the segue I spoke about, let's talk about some of your bigger projects coming up. You have you've been going at this for a while. I think ECOncrete's been around for 10 years, is it? 10 or how many years?
Just about. We started in 2012, so nearly at the 10-year mark.
Coming up to it, close enough. You've done a series of pilot projects. I believe you've got projects, over 30 projects in 8 different countries, but two of your bigger projects are coming up or are ongoing in the UK and New York. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's been a long validation process, and really the bulk of our efforts from 2012 to 2016 were validating technology globally. So we've had projects in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, in all across the eastern seaboard of the United States, Monaco, Hong Kong, Spain, Rotterdam, and in the UK and Israel, and many of them have been smaller scale projects. Many of them have been sort of validation projects with local ports, Port of Rotterdam, Port of San Diego. We just had projects with finished installation just before just last month. And we're picking more and more traction up, and the comfort level with using our technology is increasing, especially with engineers who ultimately are the ones specifying the use of the materials in these projects and infrastructure schemes. But now as we've done our validation, our proof of concept, and we've become more readily available to the market, and people have seen our technologies being successful. Now we're having much larger scale projects that we're being classified in. So this year alone, we have a project upcoming in New York that's going to be using over 1,000 of our tide pools and armoring units. We have several projects in the UK were being implemented into large-scale infrastructure schemes, and we'll be seeing hundreds of our units be deployed over the next several years as the different phases of these projects are laid out. And as far as scale is concerned, we're also heavily targeting the offshore market. And with offshore wind power due to increase exponentially over the next 10 years. All the different turbines need ultimately at the base of them scour protection. And if you imagine the turbine itself, it is a very large structure, but then around that, say for a 10 or 20-meter diameter pile, you have a surrounding circular protection of about 50 meters around that structure, basically providing stabilization for that wind turbine. So with, I think there's 26,000 wind turbines due to be constructed in the next 10 years. And imagine square footage of positive impact that we could have if those footprints were being constructed with environmentally sensitive concrete.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a major area, you would think. Renewable energy and ecological benefit with the infrastructure. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. Andrew, tell us a little bit about what's well, actually, no, we'll come back to that in a moment. Tell us, let's take a little bit of a back step. We've spent a significant amount of time talking about the problem of coastal infrastructure and the technology in your products and so forth. I just want to go back for a moment now. Now, you've been with the company almost since day one. Can you tell us a little bit about the connection that you and Shimra, the co-founders, had? What was there and your vision getting this started? How did all of that come together? And essentially, what's the big why for ECOncrete?
Yeah, I mean the concept actually came back in earlier than 2012, and Dr. Ido Sella and Dr. Shimra Perkel-Finkel, both from Tel Aviv University. They're marine biologists, and they're the co-founders of ECOncrete. And they were actually working as consultants at the time, and both being professional divers. They were doing a lot of subsea surveys on different types of infrastructure all around the world. And they started to realize that different materials were recruiting different types of biology better than others. And then, just knowing how the extent of the use of concrete globally is, they wanted to address, well, what can we do to make concrete more environmentally sensitive product and material while still, being within the bounds of the structural requirements of the industry. And, they just started to work with concrete technicians and develop different admixtures for fresh water, for temperate, for tropic conditions. And, then they coupled that with what was known and being worked on really globally as far as the design of units and how you can address biomimicry and nature-inclusive design within the design of these elements. And, they were, as I said, we went from small scale validation and proof of concept projects and pilot projects. And now, as we've gained traction and, have been very successful with the 30 projects around the country, we actually have doubled the species abundance and the species biodiversity. In all of those projects, we've reduced the presence of invasive species and increased the presence of native species. As we're gaining traction and people are getting more comfortable with our technologies, now we're going to much larger scale projects. So really our mission is, and although it's been a long road to get here and we've definitely had to do our homework, is, to improve the world for the better, one project at a time. And, you have these completely urban environments which need fully structural solutions. And, lots of times the negative impact of that, especially over in the U.S., you either pay into a mitigation bank or you do some sort of off-site mitigation project such as marsh plantings or the like. And, we want to actually reduce the negative impact of the actual construction of that project, not just push it off to some other space. So, if we can reduce that negative impact and improve the positive impact on the environments, then has been more so than been the case in the past. That's really what we're trying to do, one project at a time. So.
That's excellent. I mean, we can't keep running to offset schemes forever, can we?
Exactly.
So, just to pick up on something you said there, Andrew, that we didn't touch on earlier. Do you, when you put an infrastructure project in place, does the customer do you go back over time to actually articulate to the customer the impact, the ecological impact? So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Most of our projects to date, we do a minimum 2.5 years of post-installation monitoring. We measure the number of species, the abundance of those species. We look at the actual amount of organic and inorganic material that is being recruited. So then we can provide that as a metric for the positive impact that's being had on the environment. And you can quantify a number of the different ecosystem services that way. But then we take all those results, and it's all driven by statistical analysis, and we do comparisons versus the traditional infrastructure that's on site. And we basically do a side-by-side comparison and do peer-reviewed publications showing the impact, the positive impact that we've had on the environment. That's how I can comfortably say that we've doubled species abundance, doubled species biodiversity, reduced the presence of invasive species. Because we actually have gone out and scientifically validated that across all those different projects that we've discussed.
is the reason for the reduction in invasive species because you have a natural increase in the native species there?
Yep, absolutely. It's not that we're discouraging the invasives, but we're giving the natives a more competitive edge.
Yeah.
To compete. I mean, many times the invasives are just taking advantage of the fact that the environment's too far gone from what the native species require to properly develop. So, really, what we're doing is just giving them a more competitive edge in that fight, and then we're getting a more equal balance in the populations.
Fascinating. Andrew, we're coming to the end of our time here, but there's a couple of things that I do want to touch on. We do have a few minutes. Firstly, what does the road ahead look like? What are your priorities over the next 12 to 24 months, say?
I mean, at this point, we're just forging ahead. Obviously we've had a severe setback with the loss of Shimmer just last week, and everybody at the company is deeply saddened by that. But at our cores, we now more than ever recognize how important it is to carry on that mission that her and Ito have set forth, and we are going to continue with our good work. We're actually internally expanding. We have about 5 positions open in the company right now. So between sales, design, administration. I highly recommend anybody listening to this that's interested in working in this realm to reach out to us. We have a few of our much larger scale projects coming into fruition this year. So these are going to be our sort of flagship projects, and I feel like it's going to echo us into a new era of having a much larger impact, a positive impact on the environment. We're looking and targeting, as I said, offshore infrastructure, and if we can, be successful within that, then that impact is just going to be exponential. Moving forward, just because of the amount of offshore wind infrastructure that's planned for the future. So, really now, we're in the final transitions of being a startup company into, becoming a global power in the construction of coastal and marine infrastructure. So, I'm very much looking forward to, seeing, the positive impact that we can have moving forward. And, we're seeing engineers and landscape architects actively specify us in various projects, and it's taken us quite some time to get here. Rightfully so. It's a very conservative industry, but now that we've proven ourselves in our technologies, I'm looking forward very much so to the next several years, and having this vision become a reality.
So you're at the start of your scale up journey, if you like. Next time we speak, we probably won't be referring to you as a startup.
No, definitely not. Yeah, and I think technically we're probably not now, but you know, we're definitely coming into a new era. So, and you know, even the availability of our mold systems and our admixture, you know, are going to be readily available more so around the world, and you know, we're definitely going to become more of the norm rather than an exception.
Mm, that's fantastic. Look, the final question I was going to ask you was, how can people out there support you in your journey? You've mentioned a couple of things there, or at least one in particular, the new positions. Where can people that might want to work with ECOncrete, where can they go? Can they get in touch with you, visit the website? Is there somewhere they can visit?
Yep. Feel free to visit our website. Just EConcrete Tech, econcretetech.com. I'm sure you'll, if you just put EConcrete in to the search engine, you'll find it easy enough. Or reach out to me personally, Andrew at econcrete.us. But more so, it's just really, you know, and this is what we've been doing for years now, is just getting the word out there, that there is an alternative to the traditional solutions, and it's a successful one. You know, we're considering it a win-win. You know, we're providing for ecosystem services, we're improving the structural performance, we're cost effective, where you know, return on investment is paying for the product itself many times over. So you know, as we have more and more projects to ultimately, you know, prove these claims, you know, I think the proof is in the pudding, and you know, anybody who's working on or is a stakeholder in any coastal marine infrastructure projects, whether you be a regulator, engineer, designer, you know, when you have a project going on, just please feel free to reach out, and you know, that's really how we're working with different folks, and you know, just starting with very casual conversations and then seeing where we can take it. So.
Fantastic. So, anyone interested in working for EConcrete, reach out. Anyone interested in considering ecological benefits in the design of coastal infrastructure globally, reach out to Andrew. And generally, I'm sure you have Instagram and all the social media things that people can follow. In fact, if people would like to get a bit more of a visual idea for some of your products, I suggest checking out the website and your social pages. Gives you a much better idea of the products when you can see them. Andrew, thank you again for spending the time with me today. I really appreciate it. Again, our deepest condolences to you and everyone at EConcrete, and absolutely all of the best as you continue to push forward with Shimrit's mission.
No, thank you, Nick. We appreciate that, and the support from Ocean Impact, and looking forward to continuing to work with yourselves in the future.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andrew. Cheers.